Hello, welcome to City Council Spotlight. Today with Lance Davis, Ward 6 City Councilor. Hi, I'm Sarah Fishman. How are you doing over there, Lance?
I'm well, thank you, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. I had a minor revelation. I'm sure people have thought of this before, but I had not. Your name is Lance Davis, D-A-V-I-S, and you represent Ward 6, which includes Davis Square.
That is correct.
Is this a fated thing politically?
If you believe in fate, I suppose so. But to the best of my understanding, I bear no relation to Pearson Davis, the former business person and city official after whom the square is named.
Now that is exactly what I was going to ask you next, if you knew that, and I am impressed that you do. Do you know how big the area was that he owned?
I don't know that information.
It's like a 10-acre piece of land. This is the Bible on Somerville development, called Beyond the Neck. I think the library has it. Ways of trying to trip up city councilors, but clearly it doesn't do good enough. Okay.
Very good. Well, I'm a bit of a history nerd. I wish I had more time to dig into more of it, but I often will go down a rabbit hole when I find something interesting like that. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to start with a brief introduction, if you could, of who you are, what you do, how long you've been in Somerville, that kind of thing. If you could just give us some background.
Sure. No, I'm happy to, and thank you for having me here. My wife and I moved up here to Somerville from the West End in 2001, and we've been here ever since. And I've often said at the time, often in municipal discourse, you hear about transience, and I often bristle at the use of that word as sort of a negative, because for all intents and purposes, we were to be transients. We didn't quite know what we wanted to do, but wanted to buy a house and had the good fortune of being able to back at the market at that time. And here we are 20 years later, and I've been a city councilor now for 5 years, and I hope I'm adding something to the community. So I always remind people that you never know which newcomer to Somerville will be the next person to really invest a lot of time and energy into it. And we certainly welcome that and value the input from all the folks who have been here for generations and the folks who've been here for a few weeks as well. But that's our Somerville history. It goes back to 2001 right here in Highland Ave, and we have 2 kids who came up through largely through the public schools. My daughter's a sophomore in high school now, we love it.
So how has COVID-19 affected your family? Are both children doing what Dr. Sarah Phillips from the school committee calls Zoom school? Or to be honest, we are very fortunate. My wife and I both remain employed, and we are healthy, knock on wood, for the moment. And that's full stop. Everything beyond that for us has been frustration and inconvenience and all of that, but by comparison to the way this pandemic has impacted people elsewhere in the city, in the state, the country, and around the world, our experience is nothing compared to that. And I remind myself of that every day, and my family of that as well. It's critical that we look beyond our own, sometimes claustrophobic walls in this house, and remember how this is impacting other people and how real that is, and how life-threatening it is in many different ways. And so, like I said, we're employed and healthy, and that's the end of my concern as far as it's impacted us. But in terms of schooling, and I know you're not, but as a parent, I guess, how has the process been? Now your children are a little older, right? How old are they?
Yeah, my children are a little older, 8th grade and 10th grade. And so they haven't had any, negative impact really that we've noticed. I think they were fortunate to have, they have space, they have the resources, and for them, it hasn't been, it hasn't
we haven't seen the impact that I know many others are feeling for obvious reasons. Just those basic, the basic.
Well, if you know how to read already, then you're in a much better position.
Well, sure, but and if you have a room to to close the door, if you have a desk to sit, if you have technology that you're familiar with. I mean, within this ward, within this city, there are far too many kids who don't have that, and that's where it becomes really challenging. Wi-Fi, where I can be doing an interview from my downstairs basement office while my daughter's on a Zoom class upstairs, and it's not, hopefully not impacting the signal, right? Like those are all luxuries that we're incredibly fortunate to have. And so you really have to just remind it, every little thing about this creates challenges for different populations, and we can't lose sight of that.
Do you have any family members or constituents who have been greatly impacted, who either got sick or otherwise?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I hard to imagine any of us don't at this point.
Right.
It's been so pervasive. I have family members and friends who have who've gone through the illness. I have friends who've lost parents and loved ones. It's tragic, and our the response hasn't been what it should have been on many levels, and that's incredibly frustrating and sad as well.
So you have been vocal, at least in certain outlets, about the response and how efficient and effective it's been. So it's hard to break this down, right? Because we have federal government response and we have a change in presidents. So that's going to change. We have state response. We have the fact that we have 50 states doing things 50 different ways. And then we have that all trickling down to how effective Somerville is. So you've spoken a lot about at the state level how things are not as they perhaps should be. Can you talk about, I mean, obviously the focus of this show is the city. Can you talk about the interface between how the state and the city have managed COVID? In other words, is there anything that the state has done in your mind that has been not great, that therefore has made it harder for Somerville to be responsive?
Sure. Well, I think I appreciate the focus of your question, but any conversation about this, has to start with the threshold that, the last administration abdicated any responsibility to meaningfully try and address this health crisis, in any way, and that flows down to all of us,
right?
Both within state and municipal government and non-governmental organizations. I mean, it just that failure will be written about for generations. That put the state in a much more difficult position and puts municipalities, and it still is. We still don't have the municipal aid from the federal government that we need. The state doesn't have the aid that they can flow down to towns and cities and towns that we need. As my criticism of the state government and Governor Baker specifically has been really twofold. Initially, I and many others were frustrated with his slow response, his seeming, he just seemed to be frozen at times and not willing to look ahead and anticipate, sticking to his sort of image of being data driven. But when you're looking at data and then doing something, you're reacting by definition. And I credit Mayor Curtatone and other mayors in the area for forcing his hand. And let's be honest.
What did they? Sorry to interrupt, but what did they do? How did they force his hand?
So many of the things for which Governor Baker has taken and has given credit, and wrongfully so, in the initial.
Because it started here first.
He didn't do until cities. Right. I had conversations with Mayor Curtatone, and I'm sure he's probably talked to you about this as well. Having to go out and get the greater Boston municipalities together and force and take actions where the governor wasn't taking it. So I posted just the other day that somebody jokingly and quite correctly commented back in the spring, if you want to see what Governor Baker's doing, watch what Somerville does and then wait 3 days. And
Right.
it's
I saw that.
absolutely true. I mean, you could go back and look. We would take steps, strong, decisive steps to enforce social distancing, to shut things down, to try and stop the spread. And the governor would do nothing for days until people like Mike Conley, Representative Conley, would introduce bills or go on social media. Councilor Ewan Campen, myself, others, the mayor, through using social media pressure to try and raise the voice of people who are seeing the state government not taking action that it was clear needed to be taken.
So can we be specific here? Is there something specific, some specific action that wasn't taken that either has since been taken, or it's just different now that we're in a different surge? Or
So initially it was literally every step. Closing schools, closing businesses, enforcing mask guidance, let alone a mask requirement. I mean, Baker was days late on all of that, and days are lives lost in a pandemic like this. And anyone will tell you that, especially when Massachusetts was unfortunately one of the early epicenters, because in large part because of the Biogen conference. That was obvious to. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a public health expert, but I could see it, and because I was listening to people who are experts, and while we're fortunate that the governor did follow the lead and was willing to get dragged, kicking and screaming into these steps initially, and that did help Massachusetts through the summer. I just the other day rolling back restrictions statewide when we know that there is a new, more contagious variant that is spreading.
About restaurants
Yeah.
closing, being able to stay open later. Is that
Exactly.
what
Exactly. I mean, the fact that the casino in Everett is going to be open 24 is going to be able to open 24 hours. That's insane. And I fully recognize and appreciate how horrible this has been for businesses, and particularly small business owners. Many of them in my ward in Davis Square and Ball Square, and we have to do everything. But we should be paying them to stay closed. We should be paying their employees to stay home. That's what government should do in response to a public health crisis like this, not fiddle around with closures and open them and close them and risk people's lives in order to maintain the economy, rather than taking bold steps that we could have done. And none of this even gets to the debacle of Massachusetts' attempts to get vaccines into people's arms, which is the biggest failure that's on Governor Baker's hands in the last few weeks.
Okay, so there are a couple of different things there. Maybe start with the vaccines, just since that's most recent. So, the saying, that vaccines don't stop disease, vaccinations stop disease, and just having the vaccine isn't sufficient, and that kind of thing. So do you have a sense of how appropriately and how effectively people have been vaccinated in Somerville? Do you have in other words, have we used everything that we've been given? Or do we have days when there's a lot of stuff that's left over and we have to, as some people have in other localities, gone up and down the hospital corridors saying anyone, just to not have something not used?
So to the best of my understanding, the limited number of vaccines that the city of Somerville has been given have been used. I'm not aware of there being any, but it's such a small number. It's almost, you'd have to try not to use them up. It's like literally 100 or so.
So is that all there is? The 100 that went to, say, the police and the fire and the healthcare workers?
The city has been working with the state and with hospitals to make sure that people who are eligible under the governor's phasing program have access, that our first responders have access. I don't know yet the numbers. In fact, I'll be chairing a committee. I chair the Committee on Public Health and Public Safety. We have a meeting coming up this Monday that I've asked the mayor to attend to speak to us to this very question. So tune in for that to get more detail. But the real challenge, and I, one of the questions why is there no vaccination site in Somerville? Literally none. If you go to the state's map, there is no site in Somerville, where there are sites in Arlington, Natick, Newton, Framingham.
I have a friend.
There may be a good answer for that. I don't know what it is yet, and I certainly hope it'll change. I know that Mass General Brigham has talked about a large site at Assembly Row. I'm not sure why we don't have one open already. It doesn't make any sense to me why there's not. But
And there's a testing facility there, right?
Testing facility. Yes, the CHA testing facility is now down at Assembly, and there's a mobile site. We also, frankly, I'm frustrated that we don't have more testing facilities available throughout the city, but there are resource limitations that really tie our hands there, as I understand it. But the fact that the state has vaccines sitting on the shelves and sitting in freezers that aren't being used, that weren't used over the first few weeks more aggressively, is inexcusable. And I'm not telling anybody, I'm not breaking news, right? I mean, this has been reported across the Commonwealth. I'm just responding to what I see, what I hear from my constituents, what I hear from my family, what I hear from friends in other states, in terms of their ability to get vaccines in a phasing that still tracks the CDC's guidelines and still is, it's not willy-nilly. This is not Florida, right? But I have not heard a good explanation, and the governor's, attempted responses have felt completely flat, in my opinion, for why this has happened and why we haven't gotten more vaccines into people at this point. It seems that they're now finally doing what should have been done weeks ago. Again, just days and weeks late. This seems to be endemic of the governor's approach, which is opening large facilities, opening more facilities in towns. But even at that, having a facility at Gillette Stadium is nice, but we need to have facilities easily accessible to people in Chelsea and Lawrence and New Bedford, and places where they can't just hop in their car in the middle of the day and drive to Foxborough. Like, that's not realistic for the communities that are most impacted by this. And I'm not seeing, and maybe it'll happen over the next few weeks, and great if it does, but it should have happened 2 weeks ago. And that's where my frustration lies.
There's so many levels of this, and I'm just going to repeat what I've learned, because perhaps other people didn't get it right away either, which is that you have the vaccine. The vaccine has to be kept very cold. As long as it's kept very cold, it can last for a while. But at the beginning of a day, you take a certain amount, or the night before, and you have to warm it up. You can't inject something that cold into a human being. So then you have a certain amount that has to get used that day, which is why sometimes if people don't show up for their appointments, or there's some administrative error or what have you, then you could both have more vaccine on tap, in the sense that it's still in deep freeze, but you could have, in that particular day, more on the shelf that you have to use that day. And so it just, to me, it gets very, very complicated. You have to be very careful about what you say about rates of vaccination and that sort of thing. And you have to look at population. You have to look at whether or not you're targeting certain populations. That some states may be doing things faster, but that's because they're targeting populations differently. It gets really, really, really murky. However, all that aside, one of the things in the Globe editorial today said central registry. It should be that you go to one place online, you type in your name, and that's it, and as opposed to, you might have to sign up at CVS, or you might have to go through this health center, or what have you. So is that something that the city can lobby for, push for at the state level to make it happen, or is that an executive?
No, I mean, it's certainly something that the city can lobby for and push for, and my understanding is that the state is moving in that direction, although we've all read about the sort of failure of the system that launched on Wednesday for folks 75 and over. They didn't have the capacity, and setting aside the fact that there's no hotline, there's no phone number, you're asking people who are 75 and older to go in and navigate a system that online that is may not be as familiar to them. Folks described it as like trying to get concert tickets to choose your favorite artist, and they're gone in a minute. You have to have multiple screens up and multiple browsers.
Mhm.
Most people any age don't have that sort of wherewithal.
Right.
But to your point of doses that have been wasted, and we've seen reports too. I mean, it takes very little infrastructure to set up a wait list, even site specific, but a statewide would have been fairly easy to do as well. But for folks who live within a 5-mile radius or are able to get put on a wait list and send out a text message, towards the end of the day. And if you want to come on in and get a shot in your arm, then come on in. Other states have done this. Other states have central systems. I don't understand why here in the hub of healthcare and technology, we've completely failed to put in place a sophisticated program.
I know. Is that why Fauci was saying? Is that why Dr. Fauci was saying that we were doing a good job? Because I couldn't understand his recent comments because it sounded like praising us, but I couldn't figure out why.
I read the same comments, and to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what it was about Massachusetts' response so far that Dr. Fauci characterized as good. That's not clear to me, even from his statement. Much of what he talked about in that statement was looking forward and Massachusetts' plans in the next few weeks, which he characterized as also being, the right thing to do, and noted that there may be supply challenges and that our distribution capacity may grow to the point where it's certainly not there now, but where it's beyond the supply. But that doesn't address the failures of the past, 2 to 4 weeks. Or even more than that. The vaccine started to become available in December, if I remember correctly. So here we are, almost February, and we still have one of the lowest vaccination rates in the country.
Yeah. So I was just going to quickly say that my husband is British, and his father, who is 93, just got vaccinated, and they've had similar issues about leftover vaccine on any given day. And so we've been encouraging one of my husband's sisters to go with her father, so that for a second shot, so that if there is an extra, maybe she could get her first. It's very confusing. It's very complex. I'm just trying to.
And again, to be clear, all of this could have been avoided if the federal government had done what it should have done months and months and months ago, which was put a plan into place, be ready for this. We knew this was going to be, getting shots in people's eyes like that. That's where all of this should have happened. So while Governor Baker has failed in what was dropped on his feet, it shouldn't have been his responsibility in the first place either. That doesn't excuse the failure, but let's not lose track of the fact that all of this should have been coordinated and funded and support provided from the federal level, and it wasn't.
Yes, there's so much more we could say about this. However, I have something else I want to ask you about, and we have less than 5 minutes to go. So the Davis Square Mobility Improvement Plan, okay, which I actually use my color printer. It looks like that, right? Is very confusing. So this is an effort to do what? Can you just give me a little background on this?
So yes. So what's important to, and I, if folks want to get the definitive detail, I would strongly encourage them to go on the city's website under planning and look up, you can review the presentations and in fact watch the video. Justin and Brad and the folks in the mobility department do a better job of explaining it than I will. That said, this is at its core a plan to repave College Avenue and Holland Ave. Full stop. Right? Like that's what this is. This isn't a complete re-engineering. Unfortunately, that's not what has been budgeted. We don't have that. It's just not in the works.
But the name makes it sound like something big.
It does.
I mean,
mobility. You're right.
Like trying to take a Zeppelin through or something.
I agree. I think a mobility plan is probably. I think that the name suggests more than was probably reasonable to promise. This is at its core a plan to repave those. To their credit, what the folks in the mobility department are trying to do is squeeze as much out of that as they possibly can, right? And that's the right thing to do. Anywhere we can squeeze better infrastructure and make improvements based on modern transportation and technology and theory, we should do that. And so, and there's certainly more than enough need across the city for massive changes. More will come when we have a larger re-envisioning of the Davis Square intersection, and that's another down the road project over the next few years. This is something we can do right now, where we can use this project to squeeze as much safety out of it as we can, and so it involves reimagining how pedestrians move about these streets, reimagining how multiple modes of transportation move, buses in particular. The administration really prioritized buses, frankly, over cars and bicycles in this plan. And I understand their logic for that. I'm not saying that I necessarily agree or disagree, but I understand why. And so, using technology like bump outs and center islands, or hardening the center line to slow cars down, to make it safer for pedestrians to get across side streets, to get across main streets, using bus lanes to removing parking during certain times of the day or permanently in a few small areas so that buses can get through traffic, makes it easier for folks to take buses.
When the restaurants were taking space on, I guess it was Elm Street, to have outdoor dining, and there was only one lane of traffic flowing eastward, that was really a bottleneck. And I mean, I know this is going to be different, but
yeah,
no matter what you do, it's going to be really complicated.
I'm going to want to see the data on that, because I'm not convinced that I'll be interested to see. I'm not willing to accept, without seeing the data, that change in Elm Street significantly changed the traffic backups, at least after the initial implementation.
I'll tell you what,
first few weeks.
Driving there, it felt way less safe. I felt like I had to go at a crawl, because who knew who was going to pop out in what direction?
Many would argue that the best way to calm traffic is to do exactly that.
Yes.
Right? Is to make the drivers feel less safe. They're not less safe necessarily, right? No. But if you have a big, wide, straight street, drivers, and science shows us, drivers feel like they can just go because they can see everything and it's straight. If you make them feel a little, oh, what's going on? We're trained, and to drivers' credit, right? I'm not sure what's happening here. I'm going to slow down and be careful. That's exactly what we want, right? Elm Street was a unique scenario because of the businesses and because of COVID and the need to try and do everything we could to help these businesses survive. So that, we might have done that with more planning and otherwise, but now that we've done it, I hope that we'll be able to then put some of that planning and traffic science into, figuring out a way to make that work more permanently.
So what happens next? Are there any more community meetings, or what's the next step with this plan?
So there right now are not large community meetings scheduled. We've had 3 so far, right? There's been a significant amount of community input. The plan was online for a long period of time, where folks could go in and actually submit comments right into the plan itself. I always say, even when the official comment period is closed, we're all always going to still read emails and listen to folks, and that goes for the planners in the mobility department too. So any additional comments or input that people have, and I just got a couple emails yesterday on this from folks whose opinions I really respect, and they were very long, so I haven't read them all yet, but we will. I know that I pushed the administration to really sit down with some of the business owners who, for whatever reason, missed the memo that this process was going on. And I mean, I don't mean that like pejorative, like they literally missed the flyers that were provided to, that were delivered to their businesses. And that happens. Well, we get it. So the administration has sat down with them, and there will be more meetings there with the business owners to talk about the plan and see if there's adjustments that be made. There may be additional public meetings, but right now there's none.
Lance, I'm going to get in trouble with the big guys. We have to stop now. It's good that you're going to talk to the businessmen. It still sounds like it's an ongoing effort. This has been City Council Spotlight with Lance Davis. Have a good day.